The last thing I expected to find when I came home from school that Tuesday was my mother unconscious on the kitchen floor, surrounded by empty pill bottles. But what she said to me 3 hours later in the hospital would shatter everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Grace, and I'm 24 now, but this story begins when I was 16 and living in a small ranch house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Back then, I thought my mother, Sarah, was just going through a rough patch. Dad had left us 2 years earlier, citing irreconcilable differences, though I later learned the real reason was Mom's growing dependency on prescription medications. It started innocently enough. Mom had herniated a disc in her lower back while working her job at the local insurance office. The doctor prescribed her OxyContin for the pain, and initially it seemed like a miracle cure. She could move around without wincing, sleep through the night, and even started laughing again at our dinner table conversations. But somewhere along the way, the pills stopped being about pain management and became something else entirely. The first sign something was wrong came during my junior year of high school. I'd wake up for school and find Mom still in her pajamas at 11 in the morning, staring blankly at infomercials on our old television set. Her speech had become slower, more slurred, and she'd often forget conversations we'd had just hours before. "Mom, you said you'd drive me to soccer practice today," I'd remind her, already knowing what the response would be. She'd look at me with glassy eyes, completely confused. "Did I? I don't remember saying that, honey. Maybe you can catch a ride with Jennifer's mom." This became our new normal. Mom would make promises she couldn't keep, forget important events, and disappear into her bedroom for hours at a time. Our refrigerator, once stocked with home-cooked meals and fresh groceries, became a wasteland of expired milk and moldy leftovers. I learned to survive on cereal, ramen noodles, and whatever I could afford with the $20 she'd occasionally leave on the kitchen counter. The house on Maple Street, which had once been our sanctuary, slowly transformed into something unrecognizable. Mail piled up unopened on the dining room table. Dishes sat unwashed in the sink for days. The laundry room became a mountain of dirty clothes that I eventually took over washing myself, teaching myself how to operate the machines through YouTube videos. During this period, Mom developed an elaborate routine around her medication schedule. She kept multiple pill organizers arranged on her nightstand, each labeled with different days of the week and times of day. She'd set alarms on her phone every 4 hours, and when they went off, nothing else mattered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, important phone calls were ignored. Even medical appointments for her back pain became secondary to maintaining her dosing schedule. "Grace, have you seen my Tuesday evening pills?" became a more common question than "How was school today?" I tried talking to her about it once, approaching the subject carefully while she was having what seemed like a lucid moment. We were sitting in our small living room, and she was flipping through a magazine without really reading it. "Mom, do you think maybe you're taking too many pills? I mean, your back seems better now, and the doctor said they were just for temporary pain relief." The transformation in her demeanor was immediate and frightening. Her face hardened, and she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and almost hostile. "You don't understand what real pain feels like, Grace. These medications are the only thing keeping me functional. Without them, I can't work, I can't take care of you, I can't do anything. So unless you want to pay the mortgage and put food on the table, I suggest you stay out of my medical decisions." That conversation ended our relationship as I had known it. From that point forward, any mention of her pill use was met with anger, deflection, or complete shutdown. She became secretive about her medications, hiding them in various locations throughout the house. I'd find pill bottles tucked behind books on shelves, taped underneath bathroom drawers, and even hidden in the pockets of coats hanging in our hallway closet. The financial strain became apparent during my senior year. Our electricity was shut off twice for non-payment, the mortgage fell behind, and we received multiple notices from the bank threatening foreclosure.
Mom had been calling in sick to work more frequently, sometimes disappearing for entire weeks at a time. When her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, called the house looking for her, Mom would have me lie and say she was at a doctor's appointment or dealing with a family emergency. "Tell her I have food poisoning," she'd whisper from her bedroom, even though we both knew she'd been in there for 3 straight days. I became an expert at managing our household crisis while maintaining the appearance of normalcy at school. My grades suffered, but I managed to keep them high enough to avoid drawing attention from teachers or counselors. I learned to forge Mom's signature on permission slips and report cards. I taught myself basic home maintenance when our kitchen faucet started leaking and Mom was too incapacitated to call a plumber.
The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. My friends from school would invite me to parties or weekend activities, but I couldn't leave Mom alone for extended periods. I never knew what state I'd find her in when I returned home. There were evenings when I'd come back from a quick trip to the grocery store to discover she'd taken too many pills and was barely conscious, slumped over the couch with a lit cigarette still burning in her hand. Sleep became elusive for me during this period. I'd lie awake at night listening for sounds from her room, terrified that one morning I'd wake up and find her dead. The responsibility felt crushing for a 17-year-old. I was essentially running a household, managing finances with money I didn't have, and serving as a caregiver for someone who couldn't acknowledge she needed help. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March, just 3 months before my high school graduation. I'd been accepted to the University of Northern Iowa with a partial academic scholarship, something that should have been a celebration in our family. Instead, when I told Mom about the acceptance letter, she barely looked up from the pill organizer she was methodically arranging on her bed. "That's nice, honey," she mumbled, her words slurring together. "Did you remember to pick up my prescription from Walgreens?" I had been carrying the weight of our deteriorating situation for so long that her complete indifference to my achievement felt like the final straw. For the first time in 2 years, I completely lost my composure. "Mom, I got into college. This is important. I worked my ass off for this scholarship while you've been checked out for the past 2 years. The least you could do is pretend to care about something other than your pills for 5 minutes." What happened next would be burned into my memory forever. She slowly turned to look at me, and with perfect clarity, more lucid than I'd seen her in months, she spoke the words that would end our relationship as mother and daughter. "Grace, you need to understand something. These pills are my priority. They're what keep me going every day. Your college acceptance is nice, but it doesn't change the fact that I need my medication to survive. If you can't accept that, then maybe you should figure out your own living situation." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in her doorway, staring at this woman who had given birth to me, raised me, and was now telling me that pills mattered more than I did. The finality in her voice made it clear this wasn't just the drugs talking. This was her choice. The silence that followed my mother's declaration felt eternal. I stood frozen in her doorway, processing what she'd just said, waiting for her to take it back or explain that the medication was making her say things she didn't mean. Instead, she simply returned her attention to sorting pills into plastic compartments, as if she hadn't just told her only child that drugs were more important than she was. I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the college acceptance letter I'd left on my desk. The University of Northern Iowa suddenly felt like a distant dream rather than an achievable goal. How could I leave for college when I was the only thing preventing our house from complete collapse? More importantly, how could I stay after what Mom had just said? That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my father. Marcus Williams had left us when I was 14, and our communication since then had been limited to awkward birthday phone calls and the occasional check that arrived sporadically in the mail. He'd moved to Minnesota and started a new life with a woman named Patricia, who had 2 kids of her own. In our rare conversations, he always asked about Mom, but in a way that suggested he already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. "Dad, it's Grace," I said when he answered, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound composed. "Grace, what a surprise. How are you, kiddo? How's your mother?" The concern in his voice was immediate, and I realized he'd probably been waiting for this call for longer than I knew.
I told him everything. The pills, the house falling apart, the unpaid bills, Mom's complete detachment from reality, and finally, what she'd said to me that afternoon. He listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking deep breaths on the other end of the line. Jesus, Grace, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this alone. I should have checked on you more. I should have known it had gotten this bad. Dad, I got into college. I got a scholarship to university, but I don't think I can leave her like this. What if something happens? Grace, listen to me very carefully. What's happening to your mother, this isn't your responsibility. You're 17 years old. You shouldn't be managing a household and taking care of an adult who's chosen addiction over her own daughter. Those words, chosen addiction over her own daughter, hit differently when someone else said them. It made the situation real in a way I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. I'm driving down there this weekend, he continued. We're going to figure this out together. The 3 days between that phone call and Dad's arrival were some of the longest of my life. Mom had retreated even further into her medication routine, emerging from her room only to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen. She moved through the house like a ghost, barely acknowledging my presence.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. On Friday evening, I heard his car pull into our driveway. Through the living room window, I watched him sit in his sedan for several minutes before getting out, as if he was preparing himself for what he might find inside. When I opened the front door, the shock on his face was unmistakable. I had grown 4 inches since he'd last seen me in person, but I'd also lost weight from the stress and irregular eating. Our house, which had once been his home too, looked like it belonged to completely different people. The paint was peeling, the lawn was overgrown, and one of the front porch steps had partially collapsed. "Oh, Grace," he said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than any embrace we'd shared since childhood. "I'm so sorry I let it get this bad." Dad had come prepared with a plan. He'd contacted an addiction specialist in Des Moines and arranged for an intervention counselor to meet with us. He'd also been in touch with Mom's health insurance company to understand what treatment options were covered under her plan. "Where is she?" he asked, looking around the cluttered living room. "In her bedroom. She's been in there since yesterday afternoon." He walked down the hallway with the confidence of someone who'd lived in this house for 15 years, but I could see his shoulders tense as he approached Mom's door. He knocked gently. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I'm here to see Grace, but I'd like to talk to you too." The response was immediate and hostile. "Get out of my house, Marcus. You don't live here anymore. You don't get to show up and judge how I'm handling things." "I'm not here to judge anyone. I'm here because I'm worried about Grace, and I'm worried about you too. Can you please come out so we can talk?" What followed was a 20-minute argument through her bedroom door. Mom accused Dad of abandoning us and having no right to intervene now. Dad tried to explain that he was concerned about my welfare and wanted to help find solutions. The conversation went in circles until finally her door opened. I barely recognized the woman who emerged. Mom had always been petite, but she now looked skeletal. Her hair, which she'd always kept neatly styled, was greasy and uncombed. She was wearing the same pajamas she'd had on for the past 3 days, and they hung loosely on her diminished frame. But it was her eyes that were most shocking. They were completely vacant, like she was looking through us rather than at us. "Fine," she said, her words heavily slurred. "Say whatever you came here to say, then leave." Dad spent the next hour trying to have a rational conversation about treatment options, but Mom's responses were either completely incoherent or aggressively defensive. She denied having a problem, claimed her doctor had prescribed everything she was taking, and insisted that her medication was necessary for her back pain. "Sarah, when was the last time you actually worked?" Dad asked gently. "I work all the time. I was just at the office yesterday." I looked at Dad and shook my head. She hadn't been to work in over 2 weeks. "Mom," I interjected, "you haven't been to work since the beginning of March. Mrs. Henderson called yesterday asking if you were still employed there." The look she gave me was pure rage. "Don't you dare contradict me in front of your father. I know where I've been and what I've been doing."
That's when Dad made the decision that would set everything in motion. He told Mom that he was taking me back to Minneapolis for the weekend, and that when we returned on Sunday, we'd be bringing someone with us who specialized in helping families deal with addiction. "You can't take my daughter anywhere," Mom said, but her words lacked conviction. "Grace is 17, Sarah. She can choose where she wants to spend the weekend. And honestly, after what she's told me about living conditions here, I'm not sure it's safe for her to stay." The drive to Minneapolis gave me my first taste of what normal family life could feel like again. Dad's house was clean, organized, and peaceful. Patricia welcomed me warmly, and her kids, Michael and Emma, treated me like I'd always been part of their family. We had dinner together at an actual dining room table with home-cooked food and conversation that wasn't centered around medication schedules or crisis management. That weekend, Dad explained his plan in detail. The intervention would happen on Sunday evening. He'd hired a professional interventionist named Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in prescription drug addiction. The goal wasn't to ambush Mom, but to present her with a united front of people who cared about her and wanted her to get help. "What if she says no?" I asked.
"Then we'll have to make some difficult decisions about your living situation," he replied. "Grace, I need you to understand something. You cannot sacrifice your future trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Your mother is an adult, and ultimately, she has to choose recovery for herself." Dr. Martinez spent Saturday afternoon preparing us for what to expect. She explained that people deep in addiction often react with anger, denial, or manipulation when confronted. She taught us how to use I statements to express our concerns without triggering defensiveness, and she helped us prepare specific examples of how Mom's addiction had affected our family. The goal, she explained, is to break through the denial and help Sarah see her addiction through your eyes. Sometimes people need to hear how their behavior has impacted the people they love before they can acknowledge they have a problem. Sunday morning arrived faster than I wanted it to. As we drove back toward Cedar Falls, my stomach was in knots. I had no idea how Mom would react to seeing a stranger in our house, especially one who was there to confront her about her pill use. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom was waiting for us on the front porch. She'd actually gotten dressed and combed her hair, which gave me a moment of false hope that maybe she was having a good day. But as we got closer, I could see that her pupils were pinpoint small, and she was swaying slightly even while sitting down. "Who's that?" she asked, eyeing Dr. Martinez suspiciously. "This is Dr. Martinez," Dad said calmly. "She's here to help us have a conversation about some concerns we have." "I don't need to talk to any doctor. I have my own doctors. Thank you very much." Dr. Martinez stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Williams, I'm not here as a medical doctor. I'm here as someone who helps families communicate when they're going through difficult times. Your daughter and your ex-husband love you very much, and they're worried about you. Would you be willing to sit down with us for just a few minutes?" What happened next would determine the course of all our lives. Mom stared at Dr. Martinez for what felt like an eternity, her glazed eyes trying to process this unexpected intrusion into her carefully controlled world. Finally, she stood up unsteadily and walked toward our front door. "Fine, 10 minutes, but I'm not promising anything beyond that." We followed her into the living room where she settled into her usual spot on the couch, the corner where she'd spent most of the past 2 years. Dr. Martinez sat across from her in Dad's old recliner, while Dad and I took seats on the opposite end of the couch. The arrangement felt formal and uncomfortable, like we were strangers in our own home. Dr. Martinez began with a technique she'd taught us called reflective validation. Instead of immediately confronting Mom about her drug use, she started by acknowledging the legitimate pain that had started this entire journey. "Sarah, I understand you've been dealing with chronic back pain for several years now. That must be incredibly difficult to manage while also trying to work and raise a daughter on your own." Mom's defensive posture softened slightly. "It is difficult. People don't understand what it's like to live with constant pain. These medications are the only thing that makes life bearable."
I can imagine how scary it must be to think about not having access to something that provides relief, Dr. Martinez continued. At the same time, Grace and Marcus have some specific concerns about how the medication might be affecting other areas of your life. Would you be willing to hear what they have to say? What followed was the most honest conversation our family had shared in years. Dad went first, speaking carefully from the notes he'd prepared during our weekend in Minneapolis. Sarah, I left our marriage because I felt helpless watching you disappear into those pills. I know that makes me sound selfish, and maybe it was, but I couldn't watch the woman I married slip away and not be able to do anything about it. I regret not fighting harder to get you help before I left. Mom's response was immediate and sharp. You left because you're a coward, Marcus. You couldn't handle having a wife who wasn't perfect anymore. Don't try to rewrite history now. Dr. Martinez gently redirected the conversation. Sarah, I can hear how much anger you're carrying about Marcus leaving. That pain is real and valid. Right now, though, we're hoping you can listen to some specific examples of how Grace has been affected by your medication use. Grace, would you like to share? This was the moment I'd been dreading all weekend. I'd practiced what I wanted to say, but actually looking at my mother and speaking these words out loud felt impossible. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the piece of paper where I'd written down specific incidents. Mom, 3 weeks ago, you forgot to pick me up from school. I waited for 2 hours before walking home and found you unconscious on the kitchen floor with pill bottles scattered around you. When the paramedics came, you were angry at me for calling them. I wasn't unconscious. I was resting my eyes. You wouldn't wake up when I shook you. Your lips were blue. Dr. Martinez made a note on her clipboard. Sarah, do you remember that day? I remember Grace overreacting to a perfectly normal situation. I continued reading from my list, my voice getting stronger as I went. Last month, our electricity was shut off because you spent the money for the electric bill on pills from that online pharmacy. I had to do my homework by flashlight and eat cold cereal for 3 days. That was a temporary cash flow problem. Mom, you've been fired from your job. Mrs. Henderson called yesterday to ask if you wanted them to mail your final paycheck or if you planned to come in and get it. This was the first piece of information that seemed to genuinely surprise her. She looked confused, like she was trying to remember something that kept slipping away from her. That's not... I talked to Henderson on Friday. She said I could take the week off. Mom, it's Sunday. You haven't worked in 3 weeks. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Sarah, it sounds like there might be some gaps in your memory around recent events. That's actually very common with prescription opioid dependency. The medications can affect how our brains process and store information. I don't have a dependency. I have a medical condition that requires medication. I understand that's how it feels, Dr. Martinez replied, but dependency can develop even when someone is taking medication exactly as prescribed. The important thing is that the people who love you are seeing changes that worry them. Dad pulled out his phone and showed Mom something I hadn't seen before, a video he'd apparently taken when he first arrived on Friday. It showed our house from the outside, the overgrown yard, the broken porch step, peeling paint, and newspapers piling up by the front door. Sarah, do you remember when this house was your pride and joy? You spent every weekend working in that garden. You painted every room yourself when we first moved in. For the first time during the intervention, Mom looked genuinely upset. Not angry, but sad. She stared at the video for a long time without saying anything. I've been meaning to take care of those things, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Martinez seized on this moment of vulnerability. Sarah, what do you think would need to happen for you to feel capable of taking care of those things again? I don't know. Everything feels so overwhelming. The medication helps me get through each day, but there's never enough energy left for anything else. This was the breakthrough Dr. Martinez had been waiting for. That feeling of being overwhelmed, of not having energy for the things you used to care about, those are actually symptoms of opioid dependency, not signs that you need more medication. But if I don't take them, the pain comes back worse than before. That's called rebound pain, and it's another symptom of dependency. The medications change how your brain processes pain signals. Over time, you need more pills to get the same relief, and when they wear off, everything hurts more than it did originally. Mom was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her mind working through what Dr. Martinez had explained. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and frightened. "So you're saying I'm addicted to my own medication?" "I'm saying your body has become physically dependent on these medications, and that dependency is affecting your ability to function in other areas of your life." The good news is that this is treatable. There are medical programs specifically designed to help people safely reduce their medication while managing withdrawal symptoms. What kind of programs? Dr. Martinez opened her folder and pulled out several brochures. There's an excellent inpatient facility about an hour from here called Riverside Recovery Center. They specialize in prescription drug dependency and have a specific track record with cases like yours. The program is typically 30 days, and your insurance would cover most of the cost. 30 days? Mom looked panicked. I can't be away for 30 days. Grace needs me here. It was Dad who responded to this. "Sarah, Grace has been taking care of herself for the past 2 years. She's been managing the household, paying bills, making sure you don't hurt yourself when you take too many pills. She's 17 years old, and she shouldn't have to be your caretaker. If I go to this place, where will Grace live?" "She'll come stay with Patricia in Minneapolis until you complete the program. Then, if you're ready to maintain your recovery, she can choose whether she wants to come back here or stay with us through her senior year."
This was the first time anyone had explicitly laid out the consequences of Mom's choice. She could get help and potentially rebuild her relationship with me, or she could continue using pills and lose me entirely. "And if I say no to this treatment program?" Dr. Martinez answered honestly. "Then Marcus will need to petition for temporary custody of Grace. At 17, she's old enough that a judge would likely consider her preferences, and living in a household where there's active addiction isn't considered safe for a minor." Mom looked at each of us in turn, and I could see her weighing her options. "Can I think about it overnight?" "Of course," Dr. Martinez said, "but I do need to let you know that Riverside has a bed available starting Wednesday. If you decide you want treatment, we'd need to confirm by tomorrow morning." After Dr. Martinez and Dad left that evening, Mom and I sat in our living room in complete silence. She was staring at the treatment brochures spread out on our coffee table, and I was trying to process everything that had happened. Finally, she looked at me with clearer eyes than I'd seen in months. "Grace, do you really want to live with your father?" "I want to live with my mother," I replied, "but I want my real mother back, not the person you've become." She nodded slowly, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough?" "Then at least you'll have tried," I said, "and I'll know that I mattered enough to you for you to try." That night, I heard her on the phone with someone. I assumed it was the treatment center, talking in hushed tones until well past midnight. When I woke up Tuesday morning, there was a note on my door that would change both our lives forever. The note was written in Mom's shaky handwriting on a piece of notebook paper torn from one of my old school assignments. I recognized her penmanship, but something about it looked different, more deliberate, less scattered than her usual scrawl. "Grace, I called Riverside this morning. I'm going to try. Your dad is picking me up at 11 a.m. to drive me there. I couldn't say goodbye in person because I was afraid I'd change my mind. I love you more than these pills, even though I haven't been good at showing it. Please don't give up on me. Mom." I stood in my doorway reading those words over and over, not sure whether to feel hopeful or terrified. Part of me had expected her to choose the pills, which would have been devastating, but at least predictable. This decision to get help felt like stepping into completely unknown territory. The sound of a car in our driveway interrupted my thoughts.
Through my bedroom window, I could see Dad loading a small suitcase into his trunk while Mom stood on the front porch, clutching a purse and looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She kept checking her watch and patting her pocket, and I realized she was probably fighting every instinct to run back inside and take more pills before leaving. I rushed downstairs and out the front door, reaching them just as Dad was closing the trunk. "You're really doing this?" I asked Mom, still not quite believing it. She nodded, but I could see the terror in her eyes. "I have to. I can't lose you, Grace. I've already lost too much." We hugged goodbye on the front porch of our house on Maple Street, and it felt different than any embrace we'd shared in years. For the first time, she felt present in the moment, not halfway lost in a pharmaceutical haze. 30 days, she said. "When I come home, things are going to be different. I'll be at Dad's, but we can figure everything out when you're ready." As their car pulled away, I stood alone in front of our house and tried to imagine what the next month would bring. The silence felt strange. No alarms going off every 4 hours, no rustling of pill bottles from the bedroom, no muffled television sounds from behind a closed door. Dad returned that evening after getting Mom settled at Riverside Recovery Center. He described the facility as clean and professional, with counselors who seemed genuinely invested in helping people rebuild their lives. Mom had been assigned to a medical detox program that would gradually reduce her medication under doctor supervision while managing withdrawal symptoms. She was scared, he told me, as we packed my belongings for the move to Minneapolis, but she signed all the paperwork and committed to the full 30-day program. The counselors seemed optimistic about her chances. Moving back in with Dad and Patricia felt surreal. The last time I lived with my father, I was 14, and still believed that parents were supposed to take care of their children rather than the other way around. Now, at 17, I'd spent so long managing crisis situations that having adults handle everyday responsibilities felt almost foreign. Patricia went out of her way to make me feel welcome, setting up a bedroom that actually felt like it belonged to a teenager rather than someone forced to grow up too fast. She stocked the refrigerator with real food, established normal dinner times, and even helped me research college preparation programs for students who'd had non-traditional high school experiences. "Your grades are actually impressive considering what you've been dealing with," she said, reviewing my transcripts. "With a little extra preparation this summer, you should be more than ready for college in the fall." The first week passed slowly. I called Riverside every day to check on Mom's progress, but the information I could get was limited due to privacy regulations. Her counselor, Miss Thompson, could only tell me that she was participating in the program and following her medical protocol. "Recovery is a process," Miss Thompson explained during one of our calls. "Your mother is dealing with both physical withdrawal symptoms and the emotional work of understanding why she became dependent on medication. Some days will be harder than others." On day 10, I received my first phone call from Mom directly. Her voice sounded different, clearer, but also raw and emotional in a way I hadn't heard since before the pills took over. "Grace, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm okay, but I'm not calling with good news. In group therapy yesterday, we talked about making amends to people we've hurt. I started making a list of things I need to apologize to you for. And Grace, the list is so long I can't fit it all on paper." She started crying, and for several minutes we just stayed on the phone, listening to each other breathe. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I need you to know that I remember more than I let myself admit. I remember missing your soccer games because I was too high to drive. I remember you doing laundry and cooking dinner and paying bills while I hid in my bedroom. I remember you asking me for help with homework and me being too drugged to even understand what you were saying." This conversation was harder to hear than I'd expected. During the past few years, I'd sometimes wondered if Mom was aware of how much I'd been handling on my own. Part of me had hoped she genuinely didn't remember, because that would make her choices feel less personal. "I remember the morning you got your college acceptance letter," she continued. "You were so excited, and you showed it to me, and I barely looked up from my pill organizer. Grace, that was the biggest accomplishment of your life, and I treated it like an interruption." Mom, stop. You're getting help now. That's what matters. No, Grace. What matters is that you understand that none of this was your fault. You spent 2 years trying to save me from myself, and that was never your job. You were a kid, and I made you grow up too fast because I chose pills over being your mother. The therapy sessions at Riverside were clearly having an impact. This level of insight and accountability was completely different from the defensive, denial-based responses she'd given during the intervention. The counselors here keep asking me why I started taking more pills than prescribed, she said. I kept saying it was because of the pain, but they pushed me to dig deeper. The truth is, Grace, after your father left, I felt like such a failure. The pills didn't just numb the physical pain, they made me feel like I could cope with being a single mother, losing our financial security, watching our life fall apart. But then the pills became the thing making everything fall apart. Exactly. Somewhere along the way, I stopped taking them to feel better and started taking them to feel nothing at all. When you're numb, you can't feel pain, but you also can't feel love or pride or hope. I became a ghost in my own life. We talked for over an hour, and by the end of the call, I felt more connected to my mother than I had in years. She was finally the person I remembered from before the addiction, thoughtful, honest, and present. But 3 days later, I got a very different kind of phone call. Grace, this is Miss Thompson from Riverside. I'm calling because your mother left the facility last night without completing her program. The world seemed to stop spinning. What do you mean she left? She signed herself out against medical advice around 2 a.m. We found a note in her room saying she couldn't handle the withdrawal symptoms and needed to go home to get her medication. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. After everything we'd been through, after finally having honest conversations and making progress, she'd run back to the pills the moment things got difficult. Did she say where she was going? The note mentioned going home to Cedar Falls. Grace, I need you to know that leaving treatment early significantly increases the risk of overdose. When people resume drug use after a period of reduced tolerance, they often take the same amounts they were using before, which can be extremely dangerous. I hung up the phone and immediately called Dad at work. Within an hour, we were driving back to Iowa, terrified of what we might find when we arrived at our house on Maple Street. The front door was unlocked, and Mom's suitcase was sitting in the entryway, still packed, exactly as it had been when she left for treatment. I could hear movement coming from her bedroom, along with the familiar sound of pill bottles being opened and closed. When I pushed open her door, she looked up at me with the same glassy, vacant expression I thought we'd left behind forever. On her nightstand were at least 6 different prescription bottles, some with labels I didn't recognize. "You came back," she said, her words already slurring together. "I knew you'd come back." "Mom, what did you do?" "I fixed the problem," she replied, holding up a bottle of pills. "I found a new doctor who understands real pain management, Dr. Peterson downtown. He actually listens to his patients." Dad appeared in the doorway behind me, and his face went white when he saw the scene. "Sarah, how many pills have you taken since you got home?" "Just what I needed to stop the pain. The people at that place didn't understand. They were trying to make me suffer." It became clear that Mom had not only resumed her old drug use, but had escalated it significantly. The pills from this new doctor were stronger than anything she'd been taking before, and after 13 days of reduced tolerance, the effect was hitting her much harder. "We need to call 911, Dad said quietly. But Mom heard him and became agitated. "No hospitals, no doctors, no more people telling me what I can and can't put in my own body." She stood up unsteadily and tried to walk past us toward the bathroom, but collapsed halfway across the room. This time, when I shook her shoulder, she didn't respond at all. As we waited for the ambulance, I realized that my mother had made her final choice between me and the pills had won. The paramedics worked on Mom for 12 minutes in our living room before getting her stabilized enough to transport. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse was dangerously slow, and they had to administer 2 doses of Narcan to reverse the opioid overdose. I watched from the doorway as they strapped her to a gurney, her face gray and lifeless under the oxygen mask. "Are you family?" one of the EMTs asked. "I'm her daughter." "We're taking her to Mercy General. The next 24 hours will be critical." Dad and I followed the ambulance through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, past the high school where I should have been worrying about prom plans instead of whether my mother would survive the night. The emergency room staff immediately took Mom into intensive care, leaving us in a sterile waiting room with fluorescent lighting and magazines from 2019. Dr. Patel, the attending physician, found us around midnight with an update that was both encouraging and devastating. "We've managed to stabilize her vital signs, but the toxicology report shows she had dangerous levels of multiple opioids in her system. Some of these medications shouldn't be taken together under any circumstances. Where did she get these prescriptions?" Dad pulled out his phone and showed Dr. Patel photos he'd taken of the pill bottles we found in Mom's room. She mentioned someone called Dr. Peterson downtown. Dr. Patel's expression darkened as he looked at the images. Dr. Peterson had his license suspended 6 months ago for operating what was essentially a pill mill. These prescriptions are either old or illegally obtained. The reality of how far Mom had fallen hit me like a truck. She wasn't just addicted to legitimate medication anymore. She was buying drugs from dealers or using fake prescriptions to feed her addiction. "Will she be okay?" I asked. "Physically, she should recover from this overdose. But Grace, I need to be honest with you. People who mix this many opioids have usually moved far beyond medical dependency. This is full-blown addiction, and the likelihood of recovery without intensive, long-term treatment is very low." Dad asked the question I was afraid to voice. What happens if she refuses treatment again? Given the circumstances of this overdose, we're required to hold her for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. After that, if she's determined to be competent, she can discharge herself. However, I'd strongly recommend that you consider legal guardianship options if she continues to refuse help.
The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, legal consultations, and impossible decisions. Mom was conscious and coherent by Thursday afternoon, but her first words when she saw me weren't an apology or expression of relief to be alive. Instead, she asked when she could go home and whether Dad had brought her medication from the house. "Mom, you almost died," I said, sitting beside her hospital bed. "The doctors said if we'd found you even 30 minutes later, you wouldn't have made it." "I just took a little too much. It was an accident. The new pills were stronger than I expected." She was already making excuses, already minimizing what had happened. The brief moment of clarity and honesty she'd shown during our phone calls from Riverside was completely gone. Dr. Martinez arrived on Friday morning for another intervention, this time in Mom's hospital room. She'd brought legal documents that would give Dad temporary custody of me until I turned 18, along with papers that would allow him to make medical decisions for Mom if she became incapacitated again. "Sarah, you have a choice to make," Dr. Martinez explained. "You can voluntarily commit to a 90-day inpatient program, longer than before, with more intensive therapy, or these legal arrangements will go into effect immediately." "You can't take my daughter away from me." "You took yourself away from your daughter," Dad replied, his voice firm but not angry. "Grace has been without a real mother for 3 years. She's been taking care of herself, while you slowly killed yourself with pills." "I'm not killing myself. I'm managing chronic pain." Dr. Martinez opened her folder and pulled out the toxicology report from Mom's overdose. "Sarah, this report shows you had enough opioids in your system to kill 3 people. The only reason you're alive is because Grace found you quickly and your daughter knew to call for help immediately." For the first time since waking up, Mom looked directly at me. "Grace called 911? "Yes," I said, "just like I've called 911 4 other times in the past year when you've taken too much. Mom, I've spent more time in hospital waiting rooms than most people spend at their jobs." The weight of that statement seemed to affect her more than anything else we'd said.
She stared at her hands for several minutes before speaking. How many times? 4 times before this. Once when I found you unconscious in the kitchen, once when you fell down the stairs because you were too drugged to walk safely, once when you mixed your pills with wine and stopped breathing for almost a minute, and once when you called me at school crying and saying you wanted to die. I don't remember saying that. I know you don't remember. You don't remember most of what's happened in the past 2 years, but I remember all of it, Mom. I remember every terrifying moment of watching you disappear. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Sarah, addiction affects memory formation. The person your daughter is describing, the person who mixed pills with alcohol and talked about wanting to die, that's who you become when you're using. The person sitting here right now, having this conversation, this is who you are when you're not under the influence. So, what you're telling me is that I have to choose between managing my pain and being a mother to my daughter? No, I interjected. What we're telling you is that what you're doing isn't managing pain anymore. It's slowly killing you and it's destroying both of our lives. Dad placed the legal documents on Mom's bedside table. Sarah, if you choose treatment, these papers get torn up and we figure out how to rebuild our family. If you refuse, I become Grace's legal guardian, and you lose any say in her life until she's an adult. And then what? Grace goes away to college and never speak to me again? I don't know, I answered honestly. Right now, I can't imagine having a relationship with someone who chooses drugs over her own daughter's well-being. But if you got clean and stayed clean, maybe we could figure it out. Mom was quiet for a long time, staring out the hospital room window at the parking lot below. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The 90-day program. Where would it be? Dr. Martinez had come prepared for this possibility. There's a facility in Colorado called New Horizons. It's specifically designed for people who failed at shorter-term treatment. They use a combination of medical detox, intensive therapy, and gradual reintegration into normal life. 90 days is a long time. Mom, I said, 3 years of addiction is longer. She nodded slowly, and I could see her working through the decision in real time. Finally, she looked at Dad.
If I do this and I actually complete it this time, what happens with Grace? If you complete the program and can demonstrate 6 months of stable recovery, Grace can choose where she wants to live for her senior year of high school. No pressure, no guilt trips, just her choice. And if I don't complete it? Then you'll probably die, Dr. Martinez said bluntly. People don't usually survive multiple overdoses like the one you just had. Your body is already showing signs of serious organ damage from long-term opioid abuse. That night, Mom signed the admission papers for New Horizons Treatment Center. But this time, instead of the fear and uncertainty I'd felt when she went to Riverside, I felt something closer to resignation. I'd learned not to pin my hopes on her promises. The morning she left for Colorado, she hugged me goodbye in the hospital lobby. Grace, I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm going to try to earn one anyway. I hope you do, Mom. I really hope you do. As I watched her walk away with the transport team from New Horizons, I realized that regardless of what happened over the next 90 days, I had already started building a life that didn't depend on her choices. I had college to look forward to, a stable home with Dad and Patricia, and for the first time in years, the freedom to be 17 instead of a caregiver. Whether Mom succeeded or failed in treatment, I had finally chosen myself. 3 months later, I got a letter from Colorado, but that's a story for another day. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late June, just 2 weeks before I was scheduled to start my freshman year at the University of Northern Iowa. I recognized Mom's handwriting immediately, but it looked different again, steadier, more deliberate than the shaky scrawl I'd grown accustomed to during her worst days. I held the envelope for several minutes before opening it, sitting on the front porch of Dad and Patricia's house in Minneapolis. Over the past 3 months, I'd built a routine that didn't include constant worry about whether my mother was alive or dead. I'd gotten a summer job at a local bookstore, caught up on reading for pleasure instead of crisis management, and even started dating a guy named Tyler from my high school's drama department. For the first time in years, I felt like a normal teenager. Opening this letter meant potentially disrupting that peace.
Grace, you have to read it eventually, Patricia said, joining me on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. Whatever it says, you're strong enough to handle it. The letter was 4 pages long, written on official New Horizons Treatment Center stationery. As I read, I could hear Mom's voice more clearly than I had in years. Not the slurred, disconnected voice of someone lost in pharmaceutical fog, but the mother I remembered from before everything fell apart. Dear Grace, it began. I'm writing this letter in my 8th week at New Horizons, and tomorrow I graduate from the intensive program phase. I won't lie to you, this has been the hardest 3 months of my life, but for the first time in years, I feel like myself again. She went on to describe the treatment process in detail. Unlike Riverside, New Horizons had required her to confront not just the physical addiction, but the underlying emotional issues that had made pills seem like a solution in the first place. She'd participated in individual therapy, group sessions, family counseling, even though I wasn't there, and something called trauma-informed care that helped her understand how losing Dad had triggered her spiral into dependency. The counselors here made me realize that I started using pills to numb more than just back pain, she wrote. After your father left, I felt like such a failure as a wife and mother. The pills didn't just make my body feel better, they made me feel like I could cope with the shame and fear of being alone. But somewhere along the way, they became the source of my shame instead of the cure for it. This level of self-awareness was encouraging, but I'd heard similar insights during her phone calls from Riverside before she relapsed. I kept reading, looking for signs that this time might be different. Grace, I need you to know that I remember everything now. The fog has lifted, and I can see clearly how much damage I caused. I remember you doing homework by flashlight when the electricity was shut off. I remember you walking to the grocery store in the rain because I was too high to drive. I remember you trying to wake me up that day when you found me on the kitchen floor, and I remember the terror in your voice when you called 911. The letter became more specific, recounting incidents I hadn't even mentioned during our interventions. She remembered missing my junior prom because she'd promised to help me get ready, but had taken too many pills and passed out instead. She remembered the time I'd gotten food poisoning, and she was too drugged to take care of me, so I spent 2 days alone, sick and scared, while she remained unconscious in her bedroom. The hardest part of recovery hasn't been the physical withdrawal, she continued. It's been facing the reality of what kind of mother I became. I turned you into my caretaker when you should have been worrying about teenage things. I made you grow up too fast because I refused to grow up at all. But then, the letter took a turn that surprised me.
Grace, I need you to understand something important. I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness or to convince you to give me another chance. I'm writing because you deserve to know that none of what happened was your fault, and you deserve to know that I'm finally taking responsibility for my choices. She explained that New Horizons had an extended care program that she'd voluntarily enrolled in for an additional 6 months. Instead of returning to Cedar Falls immediately after the 90-day intensive program, she was moving into a transitional living facility where she'd continue therapy while slowly reintegrating into normal life through a part-time job and community service. I've realized that even 3 months of sobriety doesn't erase 3 years of addiction, she wrote. I need to prove to myself that I can maintain recovery before I have any right to ask you to trust me again. The counselors here helped me understand that my previous relapse happened because I thought 30 days of treatment would fix everything. And when real life got difficult, I went back to the only coping mechanism I knew. The most surprising part of the letter came near the end. Grace, I want you to go to college and live your life without worrying about me. Don't put your future on hold waiting to see if I can stay clean. You've already sacrificed too many years of your childhood taking care of me. I'm a 42-year-old woman, and it's time I learned to take care of myself. She included updates about her physical health. The liver damage from mixing pills with alcohol was reversible, the chronic back pain that had started everything was being managed through physical therapy and non-addictive medications, and she was working with a nutritionist to regain the weight she'd lost during her worst periods of drug use.
But more importantly, she was addressing the mental health issues that had made addiction seem appealing in the first place. I've been diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety, which explains why losing your father felt so catastrophic that I needed to numb myself completely. I'm taking antidepressants now, real ones prescribed by a psychiatrist, not street drugs disguised as pain medication, and I'm learning healthy coping strategies for dealing with stress and loneliness. The letter concluded with something I hadn't expected: explicit permission from me to build a life that didn't revolve around her recovery. Grace, whether I succeed in staying clean or not, you need to know that you are an extraordinary person who deserves every opportunity that comes your way. Go to college, make friends, fall in love, travel, build a career you're passionate about. Don't let my addiction define your life story. If, someday in the future, you decide you want to rebuild a relationship with me, I'll be here, working on being someone worthy of that chance. But if you decide that too much damage has been done, I'll understand that too. The most important thing is that you live your life for yourself, not as a reaction to my failures. She signed it simply, Love Mom, followed by a phone number where I could reach her if I wanted to talk. I sat on that porch for over an hour after finishing the letter, trying to process everything she'd written. Patricia eventually joined me again, and I handed her the letter to read. "What do you think?" I asked when she finished. "I think she sounds like she's finally doing the work," Patricia replied. "But I also think she's right about you needing to live your life regardless of what happens with her recovery." That evening, Dad and I talked about the letter over dinner. His perspective was more cautious than Patricia's. "Grace, I'm glad your mother is getting help, and this letter shows more insight than I've seen from her in years. But addiction is a chronic disease. People can relapse after months or even years of sobriety. You can't base your life decisions on whether she stays clean." "I know that, but don't you think she sounds different this time?" "She does sound different, but she sounded different after Riverside too, until she didn't. The only way to know if this recovery will stick is to wait and see." 3 days later, I made a decision that felt both generous and self-protective. I wrote Mom a letter back. "Dear Mom," I wrote, "thank you for your honesty about everything that happened. You're right that I deserve to live my life without being defined by your addiction. I'm going to college in 2 weeks, and I'm excited about my future. I'm glad you're getting the help you need, and I hope you continue to recover. But I'm not ready to have regular contact while you're still in early recovery. Maybe in a year or two, when you've proven to yourself that you can maintain sobriety, we can talk about slowly rebuilding our relationship." This isn't about punishment or holding grudges. It's about protecting myself while I figure out who I am when I'm not constantly worried about you. I hope you understand. I mailed the letter the next day and then threw myself into preparing for college. I bought textbooks, researched campus organizations, and even signed up for the meal plan despite Dad's offer to send care packages. The night before I left for uni, Tyler and I sat in his car outside my house talking about the future. "Are you going to stay in touch with your mom while you're away?" he asked. "I don't know yet. Right now, I just want to see what it feels like to be Grace the college student instead of Grace the daughter of an addict." "That makes sense. You've earned the right to just be yourself for a while." As I packed my car the next morning, I realized that Mom's letter had given me something I hadn't expected: permission to stop feeling guilty about moving forward with my life. For years, I'd felt responsible for saving her, and then I'd felt guilty about protecting myself when she refused to be saved. But her letter had made it clear that my recovery was separate from hers, and my future didn't depend on her success or failure. Driving away from Minneapolis toward my new life in Cedar Falls, ironically, the same town where everything had fallen apart, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about what came next. 6 months later, I would receive another letter that would test whether I was really ready to live independently of my mother's choices. But that day, heading toward my freshman year of college, I was finally free to find out who Grace Williams could become when she wasn't defined by someone else's addiction. The spring semester of my freshman year was in full swing when the second letter arrived. I was sitting in my dorm room at uni, surrounded by psychology textbooks and empty coffee cups, cramming for midterms when my roommate Jenna handed me the familiar envelope. "Grace, this came for you today. Same handwriting as the last one." It had been 8 months since Mom's first letter from New Horizons, and I'd heard nothing from her during that time. Part of me had wondered if she'd relapsed again and was too ashamed to contact me. Another part of me had hoped the silence meant she was respecting the boundaries I'd established in my response letter. College life had been everything I'd hoped it would be. I joined the campus newspaper, made genuine friendships with people who knew nothing about my mother's addiction, and was excelling in my psychology courses. For the first time since middle school, I was living a life where every decision wasn't filtered through the lens of managing someone else's crisis. But seeing Mom's handwriting again brought back a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. This letter was shorter than the first one, written on plain notebook paper instead of treatment center letterhead. "Dear Grace," it began, "I hope your freshman year is going well. I followed your boundary request about limited contact, but I wanted to let you know that I completed the extended program at New Horizons in December and have been living independently in Denver for the past 4 months." She was no longer in treatment. This could either be very good news or very bad news. "I have a job now," she continued. "I'm working as a receptionist at a dental office, and I've been attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. I have a sponsor named Elena who's been clean for 7 years, and I'm living in a small apartment near downtown." The details were reassuring: steady employment, ongoing support systems, stable housing. But I'd learned not to trust initial progress reports. "Grace, I'm not writing to ask for anything from you. I'm writing because next week marks 1 full year since I left for treatment, and my counselor suggested I might want to share this milestone with family members who were affected by my addiction." 1 year. It was longer than she'd ever maintained sobriety since the pills first took over her life, but still felt fragile and uncertain. "This year has taught me things about myself that I wish I've learned when you were younger. I've discovered that I'm actually good at helping other people. I volunteer at a crisis hotline twice a week, talking to people who are struggling with addiction or family members who don't know how to help their addicted loved ones." This detail surprised me. The mother I remembered from before the pills had always been caring, but she'd never been particularly drawn to helping strangers. Addiction and recovery had apparently changed her in ways that went beyond just not using drugs. "I talk to a lot of teenagers whose parents are addicts," she wrote. "When I hear their stories, I see you at 16 and 17, trying to hold everything together while the adult who was supposed to protect you was completely absent. It breaks my heart every time, but it also reminds me why staying clean isn't just about me anymore." The letter became more personal as it continued. "Grace, I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about the years I stole from you. You should have been worried about homework and friends and which college to attend. Instead, you were managing household finances and preventing me from overdosing. That's not something I can ever make right, but it's something I think about every time I'm tempted to take the easy way out instead of dealing with problems head-on." She included updates about her physical and mental health. The depression and anxiety were being managed with therapy and medication. She'd started exercising regularly and had regained most of the weight she'd lost during her worst periods of drug use. Most importantly, she was sleeping normally for the first time in years. "I remember you telling me once that you never knew what version of me you'd find when you came home from school," she wrote. "The pills made me unpredictable and unreliable. Now I wake up every morning knowing exactly who I am and what I need to do that day. It's a feeling I'd forgotten existed." But then the letter took an unexpected turn. "Grace, I also need to tell you about something that happened last month that tested my recovery in a way I wasn't prepared for." My heart rate immediately increased. Was this where she admitted to relapsing? "I was diagnosed with a herniated disc in my neck, the same type of injury that started my addiction 5 years ago. The emergency room doctor wanted to prescribe OxyContin for the pain, and for about 10 minutes, I seriously considered taking it." The honesty was both terrifying and reassuring. At least she was being upfront about moments of temptation instead of hiding them. I called Elena immediately, and she met me at the hospital within 30 minutes. Together, we talked to the doctor about non-addictive pain management options. I spent the next week in significant physical discomfort, but I managed the pain with ibuprofen, ice packs, and physical therapy. The experience taught me something important. Recovery isn't just about getting clean once, it's about making the choice to stay clean every single day, even when circumstances make drugs seem like a reasonable solution. This insight felt different from the abstract promises she'd made during previous attempts at sobriety. She was describing real-world challenges and how she'd navigated them successfully. Grace, I'm including my phone number and address in this letter. I'm not asking you to call or visit. I'm simply letting you know how to reach me if you ever want to. If you decide you're ready to have a conversation, I'll be here. If you decide you need more time, or if you decide you never want to rebuild our relationship, I'll respect that too. The letter concluded with something that felt like genuine closure. Grace, you are an amazing person, and that has nothing to do with me. You became strong, responsible, and compassionate despite having a mother who was absent when you needed her most. Whatever you accomplish in your life, and I believe you'll accomplish incredible things, you did it on your own. I love you, and I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. Whether I get to be part of your future or not, I'll always be grateful that I got to be your mother for the first 14 years of your life, before addiction took me away from you. Love always, Mom. After reading the letter, I sat in my dorm room for a long time, thinking about 1 year of sobriety really meant. In addiction recovery terms, it was a significant milestone. In relationship terms, it was a tiny fraction of the damage that needed to be repaired. That evening, I called Dad to tell him about the letter. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think she sounds like she's doing well," he replied, carefully. "A year is longer than she's ever managed before. But Grace, you don't owe her anything just because she's been clean for 12 months. I know, but don't you think she sounds more real this time?" She does. The question is whether you're ready to find out if this version of her can last. 3 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I picked up my phone and dialed the number Mom had included in her letter. She answered on the second ring, and her voice sounded exactly like I remembered from when I was younger. Clear, present, and genuinely happy to hear from me. "Grace, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mom. I got your letter, and I wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 45 minutes about safe topics, my classes, her job, the weather in Denver versus Iowa. It felt strange, but not uncomfortable, like running into an old friend you hadn't seen in years. As we were ending the call, she said something that meant more to me than any apology could have. "Grace, I'm proud of you for protecting yourself these past few years. You were smart not to pin your hopes on my recovery. Keep doing that. Keep living your life for yourself, not for me."
That conversation didn't magically repair our relationship or erase years of damage, but it planted a small seed of possibility that maybe, eventually, we could figure out how to be mother and daughter again. I'm 21 now, finishing my junior year with a double major in psychology and social work. Mom has been clean for 3.5 years, and we talk on the phone once a month. We've never discussed the possibility of me moving back to Iowa or spending holidays together. We're taking things slowly, building trust through small, consistent interactions rather than grand gestures. Last month, she sent me a graduation announcement. She'd completed a certification program to become a peer counselor for addiction recovery. The photo showed her accepting a certificate, and she looked healthy, confident, and genuinely happy. I still don't know if our relationship will ever be completely repaired. Some damage might be permanent, but I've learned that recovery, both hers and mine, isn't about going back to the way things were before. It's about creating something new that acknowledges the past without being defined by it. My mother chose addiction over me for several years, and that choice had consequences for both of us. But eventually, she chose recovery, and I chose to protect myself while leaving the door open for possibility. Sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.